That was something else.
So, I'm just going to start here. We're going to continue later, etc. But one thing, we don't have an eighth day of Pesach, and some people think that's great that there's no eighth day. Lani thinks it's terrible because she wishes Pesach was another week after putting in so much work to get the house ready. But we don't have the eighth day, and the eighth day. One of the things we're missing is very beautiful Haftorah, which talks basically about Mashiach. Some people read it on Yom Ha'atzmaut. Most people I know don't say the brachas; they just read it without the brachas. That's not the point. The point is what it has to teach us. It's actually, some people read the Torah also on Yom Ha'atzmaut. Most shuls I know do not read the Torah, but some who do. And if you're going to pick already something, they pick the right Torah reading, I think, which is the part which says, the beginning of Parshas Ekev, talking about how wonderful Eretz Yisrael is, including the famous pasuk Eretz Chita Sora V'Gefen Tever Mimon, etc. V'Chalta V'Savalta V'Rachtas Hashem, and then ending with the part saying that we should not say Kochi V'Otzim Yadi Yasu Li Et HaChayil Hazeh, that it's up to our own hands and our own valor that accomplished it. We should remember that Hashem gave us the opportunity to do it. It seems to me, if I was picking, that would be the ideal thing to pick, to that we should remind ourselves in Yom Ha'atzmaut. Say it, don't say it, whatever. But the Haftorah also, what this Haftorah is about, basically, is on two levels. Much of it is officially about the time that Yeshayahu Hanavi was prophesizing. Do you know when Yeshaya lived relative to the Churban? I think we went through this not too long ago in our little learning group. A lot of people think that he lived very soon before the Churban, because the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av, we read the first parak of Yeshaya, Chazon, Shabbos Chazon, Yeshayahu ben Amotz, and they always think that leads into the Churban. But the truth is, Yeshaya lived probably close to 150 years before the Churban. And what he was basically talking about was he lived during the time when the 10 tribes were exiled, and when the kingdom of Judea, Yehuda, was also in severe danger, and he was basically warning the people then, shape up, or what's going to happen, whatever it says in Shabbos Chazon, but it wasn't about what's happening immediately. So this comes from Yeshayahu, this Haftorah, and it's talking basically about it starts with the famous pasuk, at least from some people it's famous. It's on the back of the same page I gave you. Od hayom benov la'amod. The day will yet come when he will stand in Nov. Nov is famous for being the Ir HaKohanim, where Shaul HaMelech did his thing. But it's very, very close to Yerushalayim, on one of the hills. And one day he will stand there, Yinofef Yado, he will wave his hand, Har Bat Zion Givat Yerushalayim, about Bat Zion, the hill of Yerushalayim. And what's that talking about? Yeshaya was prophesying at that time who was the big enemy of the Jewish people at the time of that king. That king was Chizkiah, right?
Assyria.
Chizkiah was Assyria, right? And in particular, Sancherib, right? And he was prophesying that day will come when he will stand on that hill outside of Yerushalayim, and he will threaten you, etc., etc., and again. But there was going to be a v'yotze in the first paragraph there. V'yatza choter geza b'geza yishai v'neitzar misharashav yiprach. A shoot will come out from Yishai, and basically talking for the rest of Torah about the Mashiach, and that is what's so important. So I guess they picked Yom Ha'atzmaut to say, we're also looking forward now, just like the way they were then, to the Geula, and we're also looking forward to it. To be continued. So I started talking about before the Haftorah that those who read on Yom Ha'atzmaut, and giving you the background, and I read it's already late, and I don't think people want this to be very long, so I'm just going to talk about a couple of highlights of it, and also wanted to share something. Speaking of Rabbi Twerski, I wanted to share something from him as well. So this Haftorah of which basically comes from Yeshaya 10 and through 12, talks about the about what Mashiach will be like. And it says about that, I don't know if you want to read it, because Lonnie's pretty insistent that somebody has to read it in English.
A staff will grow from the stump of Jesse.
Jesse is the father of David, of course.
And a shoot
Yeshaya.
will sprout from his roots. And the spirit of Hashem will rest upon him. But it's rare. They will neither injure nor destroy in all of my sacred mounts, for the earth will be as filled with knowledge of Hashem as the water covering the seabed.
Okay. But basically what you saw so far is that we had a description of Mashiach, right? And that Mashiach will be coming, and that he will be able to. It says some interesting things there. It says in Hebrew, it says vehericho b'yirat Hashem. He will have. How would you say? What would you say is the root of the word lahariach? What's the word mean in lahariach? Reach, to smell, right? Laharicho, that he will have a sense of smell something with Reach Hashem, right? He'll have. Reach also, of course, means spirit, but it also means smell. That the Mashiach is going to have the sense of smell. What does that mean? And it continues, Lo l'marei einav yishpot v'lo l'mishma oznav yochiach. He will not judge according to what his eyes see, nor according to what his ears hear, but he's going to sort of do it. He's going to smell it, which is a very odd thing to say. We're going to talk about that a little bit. Okay? And what? Yeah, we'll get into what that means. Okay? So, and then he's going to be able to judge properly. And then it says, actually, and Lonnie's been very into this the last few years on Purim, it says, Vigar ze'ev im keves, the wolf shall live with the lamb. So we were dressed up that I had a wolf and she was a lamb. Or one year was Namerim Gedir Butts, the leopard with the kid. Okay. Okay, and they will come together, famous verses, etc. Lo yareu v'lo yashchisu, there'll be no destruction and no harm in all of my mountain. It's talking about a wonderful time ahead. Now this was, the Navi Yeshaya, as we mentioned, was talking about Chizkiah at the time, at one level. Because according to the Gemara, Chizkiah could have been Mashiach. He had everything that it took to be Mashiach. Which is interesting when we read this Haftorah, because at the end of the day, Chizkiah was not Mashiach. Even though he could have been, there was a certain sense of what they would call in Ivrit fisfus, which is an opportunity that was missed. Why wasn't he Mashiach? He had a few failings, but nothing that serious, right? Basically, he was one of the greatest kings ever, an unbelievable tzaddik, and did great things. But if the generation wasn't worthy of it and didn't follow him. And it went downhill fast after him. Chizkiah's son was Menashe, who was one of the biggest Rishaim of all the kings, etc. But it's interesting in terms of thinking on two levels here of what was going on in the time of Mashiach, of Chizkiah today, if this is Haftorah about Yom Ha'atzmaut, if it's talking about that Geula that could have become the Geula that we seem to be experiencing the beginnings of today. I think most people would feel, even if they feel, let's say that it's not Chalta the Geula, the beginning of the redemption, but rather it's Ikvus of the Mashiach, it's the footsteps of the Mashiach we're hearing. Most fair-minded people say, unless they're totally living in complete denial. Some people in Egypt are living in denial. But unless that's going on, most people realize that we're living in extraordinary times, and we're living in some of the things we were talking about earlier, about times that our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents only dreamed of being able to live like this. Of course, Israel is not perfect. Welcome to Israel. There's lots of things that are not quite the way they want to be. And when we think about Mashiach, but we've come a long way, baby. And it's amazing that we're in such a time, and we only hope that it's going to continue. So we hear this nevuah, whether you want to call it the Haftorah of Yom Ha'atzmaut or not. We have this nevuah on two levels of what's going on in current events. So a little bit more about what was going on in that Haftorah. It's very interesting. That as I mentioned, it was at the time when Sancheiriv was threatening Yerushalayim. What had happened then was the previous kings I forget the name of the first Assyrian king who conquered. There was Sargon was one of them, and Almanasser, I think, or something.
Shalmaneser.
Yeah, Shalmaneser maybe. They had exiled the 10 tribes, and now Sancherib came a few years later, and he was going to not only destroy the upper kingdom, but the lower kingdom. And he was initially very, very successful. Went through most of Judea like a knife through butter, and particularly there's a town called Lachish, which is sort of not too far from where Kiryat Gat is today. It was a major city in those times, and utterly destroyed. In the tablets in Nineveh, which was the capital of Assyria, there's great descriptions of what an amazing victory they had there, etc. Funny, they didn't have nothing on the tablets there about Jerusalem, because that's the way history wrote the good stuff in their history. So, and then they came to town after town, and then they were, as Yeshaya describes Yerushalayim, if you remember, he says that V'notra bat Sion kisuka b'karem kimluna b'mikshak. That Sion, Jerusalem, was only left like a little cage in a vineyard. That's all that was left, and even that was going to be severely threatened. Most of you know that Jerusalem was greatly threatened by Sancherib. What's probably the most famous thing in Jerusalem that happened as a result of that siege that he had on Yerushalayim?
His army died.
What?
His army died.
Well, before that, what happened before the siege? What defenses did Necheskia put up?
Oh, the tunnel.
The tunnel in Ir David, that whole tunnel, that he dug, was to try to keep the water inside, not to have to the outside. There's also, if you've been in the old city in the last few years, they discovered the Broad Wall. Maybe you saw in the Jewish Quarter, right? Which was a huge, humongous wall that they keep out the Assyrians. But they were sure that things were not going to go well. And then there was, very interestingly, and I think that has parallels in today's time. Sancherib's main general was a guy named Rav Sheka. Rav Sheka, however you want to call him. And he stood up there. I shouldn't say. It reminds me of a Monty Python thing. I shouldn't say that. But
No, let's fly, let's hear it.
And now something completely different.
But in that scene where the guy's standing up and just mocking them and making fun of them in the castle, right?
That's not a scene for right now.
Okay, no. But he was standing outside the wall just mocking them, right? And he was saying, I'll just read you a couple of words here, right? He wasn't doing that, no. He said to them, Ko Amar HaMelech HaGadol Melech Ashur, what is this? Why do you think you're so secure? You're so secure. You say that you have the rights. You are just mishenet kaner ratzutz hazeh. You think that you're just a little reed. We conquered this and we conquered that. And when are you going to? You say v'chitamru elai el Hashem batachnu. When you say that you say that. Well, we have God on our side. He's the one, Hashem. After all, you guys were serving other idols and you were doing all these other things, right? Why should God take care of you? And he was saying all this, by the way, in Hebrew. And they asked him, please talk Assyrian, because he was getting all the people, they're getting desperate right in. Essentially, Chazal say that he was a Yisrael Mumar, a heretic Jew, and some say he was actually Chizkiah's son. According to one opinion, yeah, fascinating. You should really read it. I'm not in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through it. But in Melachim Bey's Perek Yud Ches, it's fascinating. So standing there, and he's just about to lose faith, and etc. But Chizkiah is, and with the help of Yeshaya, are telling them not to lose faith, and everything will be fine. And then what happened was that on the night of Pesach, Leil Hiskadesh Chag. Right, all of a sudden, and we mentioned it in the Vayehi B'Chatzi Halayla towards the end of the Seder. It talks about it a little bit. That it talks about the Mano faith, that he was standing there, and then he was threatening us. But at the middle of the night, as the pasuk says, all of a sudden there was a plague, and 185,000 soldiers of Assyrians just dropped dead.
Wow.
Boom! Right? They didn't wake up actually, and there was a tremendous hatzalah when it seemed all was lost. And these things can happen. And we don't have the exact parallels today, but just thinking about how the world has changed in the past year. Thinking about how everybody was terrified of Iran and the nuclear weapons and the chemical weapons and all their tens of thousands of missiles, and how they're threatening here, and they're Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis. It's unbelievable. We're living in an almost biblical time of miracles.
And the beepers.
What?
The
beeper thing is amazing. It's an amazing thing in which that Hashem wants to help us. I mean, I'm sure you all have heard plenty of stories that even with the Iron Dome and with the arrow, it doesn't make sense. That that all those missiles, 90% of them are just landing in on open areas, or they blow up in the air, or they don't get there. It just doesn't make sense. It's beyond any explanation, except that I've heard stories that they say your God is taking your missiles away. It's just unbelievable, and we see this going on in our time, in a certain sense, and that comes to the last. If you're towards the end here, that it says when Hashem wants to, right? Just read the last few psukim here. I'm going to pick up on the line. The first word on the line is Me Eretz Mitzrayim, about 6 lines up. It says, Va'amarta b'yom hahu, and you'll say on that day, Odecha Hashem ki anafta bi. I thank you, Hashem, even during those times that you looked at me. Anafta bi is what is sort of you said, you scolded me, you looked badly at me, right? But never I saw maybe that was for the good. Ki yashuv abcha, when you turn to Nachameni, you'll be able to comfort me. And then the famous pasuk, Hine el Yeshuasi eftach v'lo evchad. My God, my salvation, I will trust in Him and I will not fear. Ki ozi v'zimras ka Hashem v'ayil Yeshua. He is my strength. He is my song. He will be my salvation. Mushavte mayim b'sason mimayneha Yeshua. All these psukim are from here that we say by Havdalah. Interesting. I'll talk about Havdalah in a bit. And by Martin by Yom Hahu, and on that day you will say, Hodul Hashem kir b'shmo hadiyu b'amim alilosav. Thank you to Hashem. Talk about all the great things He's done. Remember it. Zamra Hashem ki yigos asad. Tzali varoni yoshevet Tzion, and those who live in Tzion will be able to exult in joy. Ki gadol b'kirbech kadosh Yisrael, because the Holy One of Israel is within you. A beautiful vision of what the future. This was said, of course, before that night, that when He was encouraging them. Don't worry, Hashem will take care of you. Okay, so it's a beautiful Haftorah, and it's therefore it was in Chutz La'aretz, right, when they established this as the Haftorah of the 8th day of Pesach. The whole theme of 8th day of Pesach really is part of the last days of Pesach, which are looking. Yes, they're looking back at the Yom Suf, but they, just like in the Seder, like the first part of the Seder pretty much is looking back. The second part of the Seder is pretty much looking forward. Most of it is looking forward to the time of Mashiach and looking forward to Adir, who will be even at Beis Bakarov, and what will be in the future, and Kasher Zachinu L'Sadr Nizke, looking towards the future, looking towards the time of Mashiach, to the Gula, Shvor Chamas Chalagoyim, etc. So the last day of Pesach for sure is looking forward to that time of Geula. And now that we don't have that last day of Pesach in Eretz Yisrael, we have the last day, but we don't have the 8th day. But we look forward to certainly with the Geula coming, and it's again, if I had to choose a Haftorah for Yom Ha'atzmaut, they would certainly be among the ones I would think about choosing, especially because you don't get to read it otherwise here. Okay. But thinking about Mashiach a little bit, and I wanted to share with you some things. Some of you know that I worked for a few years on trying to put together a book by Rabbi Twerski, and where he gave a series of lectures. Maybe you guys attended them. I don't know. Many years ago, he gave a few lectures on the 13 principles of faith, going back like 25, 30 years ago. I don't know if you maybe were amongst those who heard them at the time. What?
I think so.
Could be, right? So they were all taped, and then they were just sitting there, and I heard them, or some of them, and I said to him, this got to be a book. And it took me a while to convince him that it should be, and then I basically transcribed all of them and edited them and added notes to them, and now it's been sitting waiting for 3-4 years, waiting till he actually will read it so we can publish the thing. But I hope he gets to it. Anyway, so of course, if it's about the Ani Mamins, so one of the Ani Mamins is about Mashiach. Surprisingly enough, that's the most famous one, right? And he has a whole discussion of how are we going to know, who's the Mashiach? And it actually is a very interesting machlokes and discussion between the Rambam and the Ravid. Okay, and this is in the 11th chapter of Hilchos Malachim. Talks about and etc. And he talks about Mashiach, right? And who he's going to be. And it's a big question. How are we going to know who he is? Why is that an important question? Because there have been many people who've come through the years who've claimed to be Mashiach, right? I'm not even going into what's going on today in certain quarters. There've been many false messiahs over the years, and probably who's the most famous one? Who was the false messiah of all false messiahs? The Shabtai Tzvi, but that was after the Rambam's time. But before the Rambam's time, Bar Kokhba, and he convinced a lot of people that he was the Mashiach, including Rabbi Akiva, right? Who was the greatest of the great. So obviously, if Rabbi Akiva could get it wrong, we have to figure out how are we going to know when somebody shows up. Like every day in Jerusalem today, you'll meet 3 or 4 people who claim to be Mashiach, right? So how are you going to know who it is? So the Rambam has a whole list of things over here. He goes through the background of Mashiach, and then he says that he has to do a whole bunch of things. There's certain things that he has to accomplish. And he says, and I'm just skipping here. Don't think that he has to do miracles, or he has to create new things, or mechaya mesim, or bring the dead to life, or these kinds. That's not it. Shaharei Rabbi Akiva was a chacham gadol. Rabbi Akiva was a great chacham, and he carried water for Bar Kokhba. He calls him Ben Kusiva. That's the Kusiva, because Kozev, it's like the one who was the false one. Right? He said he's Mashiach. So therefore, until he was killed. So what is it? And so what is it? He says that if a person has to do the following things. Im Yamod Melech mi Beis David. If first of all we know he's actually a descendant of David, that's one. I don't know if he has some way of proving it. Till recently, the people had Yichus books, so some people had it. Some people had it. I don't know, but if he can prove it somehow, then Hoge b'Torah, Vosik b'mitzvos, Kidar David Aviv, and he's a big Talmud Chacham, and he does a lot of mitzvahs like David. He's saintly like David, and Torah Shabbat Peh. V'Yochav Chol Yisrael leilech bo lechazik b'Gad, and he manages to convince many, or most, or all, he says Kol Yisrael, to follow the Torah. V'Yilchem Melchem Hashem, and fight God's battles. If that person is Mashiach. No, that person is Becheskas Mashiach. He's a presumptive Mashiach, right? And if he does all those things, and then he's Matzliach, and then he builds the Beis Hamikdash, and then he gathers together all of Israel, then he's Mashiach Bevadai. Then he's for sure Mashiach, and he will bring everybody back, and the whole world will come and serve Hashem again. I'll just say one sentence about Chabad, who claim to be big into the Rambam, how they managed to say the Rebbe's Mashiach. I mean, even if you'll agree that he did some of those things, that's somewhat debatable, but even granted that he certainly did do there is a tradition that in every generation there is somebody who could be Mashiach, and maybe even Beches Mashiach, but if they die and they didn't build the Beis Hamikdash, and they didn't, and then maybe it's an unfortunate thing, but maybe he could have been. Okay, well, we're not going to get into Chabad. Okay, so anyway, but the Rambam is saying here that there are certain things that you have to do, right? He has to do all these things. What?
You wouldn't know it was Mashiach until he built the Beit HaMikdash?
Then that'll be Mashiach for sure. Before then, he's the presumptive Mashiach, Becheskas Mashiach. If he manages to do the other things he lists. But if he does these things, okay. And then, but the Ravid, who's on every page of the Rambam, you're familiar. He was the one who always found fault with the Rambam said this, Rambam said that. Why? Won't go into now. But anyway, he said, I don't agree with this. V'halo ben Kaziva haya omer anahu malka Mashiach. Ben Bar Kokhba said, I'm Mashiach. So what did they do? they came, Shochu Chachamim Levadko, so they sent Chachamim to check him, Imoreach Vidoyin, if he can smell and judge. And they saw that he couldn't do it, so then they killed him. They didn't kill him, they allowed him to be killed, whatever the story was, without going to that now, right? What's the Ravid basing himself on? What do you mean he could smell and judge? Basing himself on this Haftorah, right? On this Haftorah, that he has the Mashiach has the ability to smell. Right. So Rabbi Twerski had a whole shiur on what that means, to smell and judge. Okay. So first there's an interesting Bnei Yissuschar, a famous Hasidic sefer. He says if you look at, there's a pasuk on the original sin, as it's called, right, of the chet of in Gan Eden, right. It says Vatera Ha'isha. What does it say? Kitov hametz lamacha v'nechmadhu leinayim. It says, it mentions she saw it, she heard it, she tasted it, right? She touched it. All these things, right? They somehow, and therefore that seduced her, and then him to eat of the fruit, right? There's one of the 5 senses that's not mentioned in that pasuk. The sense of smell, right? So you say Nira Mezeh, we see from this Asher Chush Hareach Lo Nifgam Kol Kach Ke'ein Chushim, that the sense of smell did not get corrupted in the original sin like the other ones did. Kilo what? Bnei Yissuschar, right? Kilo Nishtamshu, they didn't use it, and therefore Timtza Ad Hayom, you hear till today that Chush Hareach Ruchani, that the sense of smell is more spiritual. And the haneshama nehenes mimenu v'lo haguf, and the one that gets that, what kind of pleasure from a good smell when you're getting a good smell? Some people are very into them, like Shimshon and other people, into odors. It's a spiritual thing. It's a neshama kind of thing. The neshama has it. It's not the body so much that gets the pleasure from a good smell.
That's why at Havdalah.
Oh, so he said that's why Havdalah. We're leaving Shabbos, and we have all these special spiritual things. So we smell besamim. Why do we smell besamim? He said because the besamim is giving the neshama some pleasure to tell us during the week. We also need to continue to give pleasure to the neshama, right? Even though we don't have Shabbos, we should strive to do that. That's why That's why besamim Havdalah. It's okay, and etc. And because the chet was not, and therefore it wasn't corrupted, and therefore that's why Mashiach is going to be able to use that sense. Okay, fine, that's very nice.
It's literal.
Right?
According to this, it's literal.
Okay, yeah, etc. Okay, so he says, and that. All right, I'll skip this part. It says part of it also says Kol haneshama tahalel. The soul is supposed to serve God. The last pasuk in Tehillim. It has to do with with that the neshima, the breath, that our noses basically are used both for breathing and for smelling. And it's interesting. He said that there are certain senses that we have to do something. Certain parts of our body that keep us alive. We have to eat, we have to drink, we have to provide barbecues, we have to do different things so that we could. But also another thing that keeps us alive is our breath. Breath is almost God. It breathes for us. We don't do anything. I mean, sometimes somebody's had trouble breathing. You may have to do something, but our breathing apparatus works automatically. We don't have to do anything. If we just leave it alone, it works, right? That comes from Hashem, but that also basically comes through the nose. Basically, the nose is a time. Maybe that's why Jews aren't known for their noses. I don't know, but the nose is a very spiritual part of the body. That etc. Okay. But what is this judging part about? He said something very interesting. Each of us has to make judgments. What we're learning now during this time of year, we're supposed to go through Pirkei Avos, and a lot of Pirkei Avos really are things that judges have to be involved with, and courts have to be involved with. And people sometimes wonder, why is it so important for regular people to worry about that? And the answer is, of course, because each of us are judges. We all say we're supposed to be non-judgmental, but we all make judgments all the time. We all have to decide if we're doing this, we're doing that, if this thing is good for us, not good for us. Are we going to participate? Is this thing being offered to? We have to judge. And a lot of that advice having to do for judges applies to each of us. And each of us, some people have a judge just for themselves, some people for their kids, for their household, for the community. Everybody has to exercise judgment. And there's some things we can decide by ourselves, and there's some things that are more difficult to decide, and we have to. He's very interesting. The Rabbi Twerski says this: each of us is supposed to develop a sense of das Torah. To some people, that would be anathema to say such a thing. That each of us is supposed to be das Torah. What's das Torah? So das Torah basically is because there are many questions that each of us sort of can probably decide to some extent. And there's some things that, we need, it's hard for us. They're more complicated. They're more there are all sorts of various issues itself. And we don't know what the right thing is necessarily to do. So when we go to Das Torah, basically we're going to a person who has filled themselves with a lot of Torah, with a lot of understanding of the way the Torah thinks, the way the Torah is Akasha, Raya, etc., is able to understand things. And that person, when they think about an issue and then they hear that question and try to offer an opinion, it's filtered through a brain which has been trained to think about things in a Torah way, and that's important. But even beyond that, there's the way in which we're able to see something, because basically, if he says that if you compare that the other four senses, right? There's the sense of seeing and hearing, tasting and touching, right? You could divide those into two groups. The hearing and seeing is one group. The tasting and touching is another group. Why is that? Hearing and seeing, you basically do at a distance, right? You're not immediately in contact. A little bit further away, and in fact, if you're too close, you usually can't see it. Or you can't really hear it. You have to be a little bit further away. Touching and tasting obviously you have to taste the thing has to touch, and touching you have to touch the thing, right? It has to be immediately, have to be very close to it to be able to exercise that sense. Smelling, very interesting, is somewhere in between. You can smell something right there. You can smell something at a distance. But more than that, even when we smell at a distance, how does it work? How does it work? Why do you smell something? Why do I smell something that's over there?
Because the wind brings it to you.
But what's the wind bringing?
Molecules.
What?
Molecules.
Bringing very small particles or molecules, whatever they are, from that thing, and they are coming and touching I think it's called the olfactory nerve inside your nose.
The olfactory.
And that your nose then actually gets touched by that thing that's over there. So it's at the distance, but also touching at the same time. And it has both. It's a bridge, so to speak, in between seeing and touching. Rav Hirsch actually has a very beautiful comment based on this. He said all the time by korbanos, right? When we're saying that something is reach, nichoach, ishel Hashem, something is this korban, Hashem appreciates the smell of that korban, and we wonder, what does that mean? God likes barbecue. What does that mean? That he likes the smell. It's kind of a little weird. What does that mean? So he says that's what it means. What it means is that just like when smell, basically this tiny molecule goes from that thing all the way into your nose. So what we ask when we say Ritzei Hashem Elokeinu b'Amcha Yisrael Usfilo, someone Hashem, please desire us, we're offering Hashem this tiny, compared to the infinite God, we're offering this tiny little nothing, right? But a little something, but we're sending it, and it goes, because He's designed it that way, that it goes and it goes all the way and touches Him. That He's touched by that little thing that we have, comes all the way to Him, and that the same way of that smell works. It's a metaphor for the way that our little actions God chooses to feel as if they're immediate, and He has a touch. It's a very beautiful explanation. So when it comes here to judging, it's very interesting, because how does a judge judge? A judge basically usually he'll sit there in his robes, right, and then he hears the different sides, looks at the evidence, thinks about the law, right, and tries to etc. But there is sometimes a problem. A problem if the judge is too close to the people, so he'll be biased. If he's too removed, has no idea of what they're about, it's also very difficult to relate to what they're doing. So therefore, for instance, there's a halacha that a judge supposed to be married and have children. Why? First of all, because he can relate to families, he can relate to people, and he also, when a person has children, so they learn how to have compassion for somebody else, they learn how to care for somebody else. There's a whole aspect that a judge who was never married, never had children, etc., never is able to have that empathy with other people that's required for him to be able to see properly people and be able to judge them properly. And it's only with doing both that he's able to do that. So in fact he brought a very interesting story. They say that the Tzemach Tzedek, one of the previous I think Lubavitcher Rebbe's, so when his Gabbai noticed that when he would have Yechidus with somebody, they would come in and talk to him, and the Rebbe, he was, after the Yechidus, Rebbe was always like so sweaty, and all his clothes were wet. He had to go and change his clothes before he saw the next person. That often happened. And this Gabbai saw this time after time, was a little bit annoyed. He has to keep running to the washing machine. He says, "What's going on in there? You're just sitting at your desk. Why are you getting so sweated up?" So he said, very simple. This person comes in, and I'm first hearing them. I try to hear them objectively, as the Rebbe hears this person. But then if that's not good, because I'm not going to be able to really hear them well unless I understand their situation and their shoes. So as it were, I have to take off my clothes as a Rebbe, and I have to try to put myself into where they're at and thinking about the situation as where they are, etc., and then go through that. And then I have to come back and think about it again more objectively. And back and forth. You can change clothes so many times, you also get all sweated up. See, he says, right? So it's important to have both of these, but to be able to do but it's almost impossible for a judge to properly be somebody who's able to be both remote and distant at the same time, unless the judge could use the sense of smell. And the sense of smell is something basically that is able to, almost in that Das Torah way, know something in a different way. Not if the person just from the actual evidence, but almost getting a sixth sense from HaKadosh Baruch Hu telling him that there's something here. And that's something we're actually familiar with. In English, we have something that says it doesn't pass the smell test. Right? What do we mean by that? It's just, I can't say exactly why this is the wrong thing to do, but it's just not. It just doesn't smell. In Yiddish also, they actually use the word to schmecken moist, to smell what's going on with that person. It doesn't smell right. And what Rabbi Twerski was saying on a deeper level, what that means is that there's a certain sense, that they can have it at a low level, and Mashiach will have it at a very high level, and that's what we're going to test him with, and Bar Kochba wasn't up to it, obviously, but that Mashiach will be able to have that cell that he can see the two people in front of him, see the dispute they're having, and just know, like a sense of smell, not being too close, not being too far, not having that the other senses which were corrupted in the Garden of Eden. He'll have those things and be able to understand it. So that's the idea of the Mashiach, that to be able to have these things. So just to wrap up here, we're looking forward certainly to Mashiach coming, and we're looking forward to a time when Mitzvah Shem, a lot of our disputes go away. And today, in Israel, with all the wonderful things going on here, there's also sometimes terrible disputes and and people just don't get each other. They're not willing to hear each other. I often feel that let's say the frum people don't really appreciate how much the secular people did and are doing to investing to make this country what it is, and to build the infrastructure of the country, and to serve in the army, to practice, and how much they're doing that. They just want to be appreciated. And the other way around too. The secular people don't understand how much frum people really do love all of Am Yisrael. All they want is that things should go more according to the Torah, that people should be able to experience Shabbos and experience Kashrus and experience everything that their Jewish lives. They feel bad that so many things are going against Torah, and to the extent that it are taking people away from being able to experience it. But if people just appreciate it, understand where they're coming from, and be able to get that sense of not being too close or far, be able to smell, so to speak, what's happening. In Mitzvah Shem, we'll be able to come and on Yom Ha'atzmaut, we'll, unlike today, which unfortunately is a controversial thing. I mean, it should be pashut to everybody. It's my view anyway, that we have to thank Hashem, that we have to say Hallel in one way or the other, with a bracha, without a bracha, but to appreciate the tremendous opportunity we have, and may it all, we'll come to be able to celebrate together without any divisions. Mitzvah Shem soon.